So I heard from a friend recently that after 20 seasons of television, Grey's Anatomy, the popular medical drama, is adding a hospital chaplain to its cast. Now, on the one hand, I'm really pleased by this. I think chaplaincy is really important. And on the other, I was really thinking about it because I imagine part of the reason it's taken them 20 seasons is that chaplains are not very interesting, dramatic characters. In fact, all the clergy I can think about on television, or not all of them, but almost all of them, are portrayed doing very non-clergy sort of things, solving crimes or constantly getting in trouble or that sort of thing. I think the work I do is really interesting, but I get why it wouldn't fit in very much on a drama on TV. But it did make me think of the time I did spend in a hospital doing chaplaincy. Like most of my UU colleagues and many ministers and clergy of other traditions, I did something called CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education, which is a lot of words for essentially a chaplaincy internship. I did mine in a hospital setting, St. Elizabeth's up in the Boston area, which is an interesting mix because in some ways it's very much a community hospital and in other ways it's a large hospital that does all sorts of work too. It's a little bit in between. And so I got one of the most meaningful, if a little strange, compliments of my life from my chaplaincy supervisor there. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember his exact words, but I certainly remember the tone and the meaning. He said something like, "The patients in the psychiatric unit like you because you listen to them without reacting." Let me unbreak that down a little bit. A little context. The patients in that unit were all in very serious crisis, very serious mental health crisis. It was a locked unit. People were not there of their own volition. Many of them were there on 72-hour holds, which is a court had sent them against their will to that unit to have 3 days of trying to get their medication and other support in order to stabilize, in order to help them get out of crisis mode at least. A staff person there put it to me that almost all the patients were there because they had either hurt themselves or someone else. A significant portion of the people there had attacked a police officer who was called out to help them because they were in crisis. And to give one little anecdote, on my very first day, the very first 5 minutes I was on the unit, in fact, a patient who I had not yet met informed me that I could go straight to hell. She said this very loudly in the midst of a lot of other people. And as I told my wife later, I was like, usually it takes people at least like half an hour before they tell me to go to hell. So that was a little weird. But that gives you a little context. When I spoke to patients there were often some pretty strange things coming out of their mouths. I vividly remember a patient who thought he was Jesus, which is a pretty common thing, actually. Another who was deeply tormented by the voices of demons that he heard, voices that no one else was hearing. A lot of them didn't really seem to know where they were or why they were there, and others you could barely talk to at all. They couldn't really manage speech at that moment. And of course, a few who were just desperately, deeply depressed. So the people in that unit were used to those who listened to them having pretty extreme reactions to what they said because given the way they were presenting. People in this unit were experiencing crisis-level mental health problems and they acted and sounded like it. It's a really serious thing, a sad thing often. But to be able to help people in crisis was deeply meaningful too. So I heard some really wild things. But I also knew that what these people needed more than anything was A, medicine, B, support, but C, the thing I could actually do something about, someone to just listen to them, to take them seriously, no matter how strange the things they were talking about were. And what they didn't need was one more set of thoughts or ideas or reactions, because many of the people I spoke to had more than enough going on in their heads already. They did not need my input. So for them, listening to those stories was both what I could offer, not being a doctor or a social worker, but rather a chaplain intern, and was something that they deeply needed. And part of the power of being there as a chaplain was that I didn't need anything from these patients. I didn't require information from them other than whatever they wanted to tell me. I wasn't trying to force them to take their medication like the doctors and medical staff might be. And so I could just listen to them. A number of chaplains, hospital chaplains I know, have told me that one of the most powerful things that they can offer is the ability for patients to say no. Because nobody has to meet with the chaplain, nobody has to listen to the chaplain, and that's simply not the case for many of the things that happen in the hospital. And so I was particularly good at not reacting, no matter how weird the things people were saying were, and that was a powerful thing. I didn't even know I had that superpower before that summer doing that internship. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not advocating for always listening without reacting. In fact, that's not always the right thing to do in your lives. Your friend or your spouse or your relative probably wants some reaction, at least to know that you're empathizing with what they're feeling or saying. And I did that when it was appropriate, certainly. But what I will lift up is the power of listening without expectation. The power of listening as deeply and intently as you can, putting aside your own thoughts or ideas, any distractions from the world. The ability to listen to someone as if they were the only thing worth paying attention to in that moment. And the power of taking that in, absorbing it, perhaps asking a question or two for clarity. The power of hearing and empathizing. Empathy is to feel, at least to some small degree, what another person is feeling. And for me, this is different from sympathy, though there's some overlap in the definitions. The way I think of these two words, and it's helpful for me to make this distinction, is that empathy is feeling what someone else is feeling. Sympathy is feeling bad or good about what they're feeling. In short, I'm advocating for us listening as a way to affirm those around us, to let them know that they're valuable, to seek greater understanding, and ultimately to transform the world for the better through the power of listening. I want to share a short story from the Reverend Barbara F. Myers. She writes, "Once during my ministerial internship, a woman I'll call Clara came up to me during the hustle and bustle before the Sunday service. I knew Clara struggled with anxiety, and now in great distress, she told me how anxious she was and she didn't know what to do. She was frantic, and I didn't know what I could do for her. At a loss, I suggested we get out of the busy hallway and go together to a nearby empty room. I sat with her there, holding her hand in silence, thinking, what can I do? What can I say? I don't know what to do. And after a couple minutes, she said to me, I feel so much better just sitting here with you. I was amazed to realize that just by being present with Clara, caring about her, I had helped her. That my presence in and of itself was a gift, and that her acknowledging that was a gift to me." So ends Reverend Myers' words. The presence of a listener transformed that moment. I have plenty of my own stories like this, including ones very much like Barbara Myers. One of them is a woman many years ago who asked to meet with me. I was the minister of the congregation she attended. We talked about when and where to meet and ended up meeting in an ice cream shop near the church, which incidentally I highly recommend as a meeting place. An ice cream shop or coffee shop, whatever your favorite is, goes a long way in pastoral care. Because feeding people is not just a metaphor, it can be literal. She was feeling anxious because of a difficult family situation, but as I listened and asked a few clarifying questions, it became clear to me and ultimately to her as well that the immediate issue for her wasn't the situation. Sadly, there wasn't a lot she could do about it one way or the other. It was something that others would have to take care of for themselves, and she knew that. No, the real issue for her was the anxiety the situation was causing in her life. She was so anxious about it that it was affecting her daily routines. Now, having that realization didn't fix the anxiety, not instantly, but it helped her get perspective on it and to begin to let some of that anxiety go. And all I did in this conversation was listen and ask a couple questions. I certainly didn't treat her in any medical or therapeutic sense. I didn't give any brilliant advice about the situation, which she didn't need anyway. Just listening, just my presence, as Reverend Myers called it earlier, was enough to help her feel heard and to be able to help herself. And in my experience, this has not been a rare thing. This is the sort of thing that happens every day. It happens with our family members or our friends, our spouses, our coworkers, our fellow congregants, even random strangers on airplane flights, for instance. I'm a big believer in practical advice, so I want to give you some thoughts on guidance, and I've made a list, which is put together from several sources and from my own experience. I have 7 ways to listen better, so stay with me for a second. They're short, I promise. Number 1 is make it clear that you're paying attention. Face the person you're talking to. Nod your head, smile, or make small noises like yes or uh-huh to show that you're listening and encourage the speaker to continue. Number 2, resist interrupting. Several lists I saw said don't interrupt, and I think that's hard, but resist it. Being interrupted is frustrating for the other person. It gives the impression you think you're more important or that you don't have the time for what they have to say. Number 3, listen without judging or jumping to conclusions. Try to focus on the listening. Equally, don't assume that you know what's going to be said next. 4, a related note, don't start planning what to say next, because you cannot fully listen and prepare at the same time. Number 5, resist giving advice, especially if it's not been asked for. It's not always easy, but lending a listening, supportive ear can be much more rewarding than telling someone what they should do. Number 6, and perhaps this should be farther up the list, remove distractions. Put your phone away. Try to be in a place without lots of noise and action around you. In Reverend Myers' story, she went to a quieter, less busy space with the person she was talking to. Number 7, just 7 of these, we're almost done. Ask questions. Asking relevant questions can show that you've been listening and can help clarify what has been said. Now, these aren't a rule book or a perfect guide, but thinking about how we listen, about how we have a conversation with someone, is a powerful tool, especially in a society that has often taught us to have something to say the instant someone stops talking, perhaps before they stop talking. In a world that constantly subjects us to distractions, where multitasking is thought of as an unquestioned good. So friends, thank you for listening. And I invite you today to listen to someone in your life, to take the time and effort to be present to them, because it just might transform our world for the better. So may it be.